Every morning for Lucas started the same way, in complete silence. The small, cozy house where he lived was a reflection of his inner world, quiet and introspective, filled with unspoken emotions. At 10 years old, Lucas was an autistic boy who preferred expressing himself through his drawings. Art was his safe haven, the place where he could pour out all the feelings he couldn't find words for. Lucas' room was a universe of colors and shapes. The walls were plastered with his drawings, fantastical worlds that lived in his imagination. Talking trees, rivers that flowed into the sky, and animals that seemed to understand him better than anyone else ever could. His mother, Maria, was always there, watching him with a mix of love and concern. She was a kind and patient woman who did everything she could to understand and support her son. But there was always that invisible barrier, the one that kept her from fully entering the world Lucas created for himself. That morning, as Lucas was getting ready for school, Maria noticed something different. The silence that surrounded him felt heavier, more intense. She knew school was a challenge for him. The other kids didn't understand his quiet nature and often left him feeling out of place. "Lucas," Maria called gently as he slung his backpack over his shoulder. "I've got a surprise for you after school today." Lucas glanced at her, curiosity flickering in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He simply nodded, adjusted his glasses, and walked out the door. School was as it always was for Lucas. He spent most of the day with his head buried in his notebook, drawing to keep himself distracted from the whispers and giggles that echoed around him. When the final bell rang, he hurried home, eager to retreat back into the safety of his room. When Lucas walked through the door, Maria greeted him with a warm smile. "Come with me," she said, reaching out for his hand. "I want to show you something." She led him into the living room, where a small cage sat covered with a cloth. Lucas eyed it curiously, unsure of what to expect. Maria carefully pulled the cloth away, revealing a bright green parrot inside, its feathers gleaming as it looked up at them. "This is Max," Maria said softly. "He was rescued from a place where he wasn't treated well. I thought he might make a good companion for you." Lucas stared at the parrot, unsure of how to react. He had never had a pet before, and the idea of having one now was a little overwhelming. But there was something in Max's gaze that drew him in. It was almost as if the parrot was waiting, just like Lucas often did. "Max is a special parrot," Maria continued, trying to bridge the gap. "He can mimic words and sounds. I think the two of you could become good friends." Slowly, Lucas stepped closer to the cage, still unsure of what to make of it. He watched Max for a moment, and the parrot tilted its head, mirroring Lucas' own curiosity. "Hi," Lucas whispered hesitantly. To his surprise, the parrot responded with a sound that echoed Lucas's soft voice. Lucas flinched, caught off guard, but something stirred inside him, a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time. He turned back to Maria, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. "Do you like him?" she asked gently. Lucas didn't respond with words, but the way he continued to watch Max said enough. There was something comforting about the bird's quiet presence, something that made Lucas feel less alone. That night, as Lucas drew in his room, he could hear the soft sounds of Max in the living room. Each mimicked word and noise felt like an attempt to reach out, to break through the silence that surrounded him. For the first time in a while, Lucas didn't mind the sound of another voice. In fact, he found it strangely soothing. Without fully understanding why, Lucas began to sketch Max in his notebook, a picture of the parrot flying through a star-filled sky. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he sensed that Max's arrival might change something in his life. Something that he couldn't quite grasp but was willing to explore. And so, the first night with Max passed, leaving Lucas with a newfound sense of curiosity and a glimmer of hope. He didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to find out. The next morning, Lucas awoke to the sound of Max mimicking the first rays of sunlight filtering through the window. The parrot was more active than ever, swinging on its perch and letting out soft whistles that echoed through the otherwise quiet house. Still groggy, Lucas listened for a moment before getting out of bed. As he stepped out of his room, he saw Max in the living room, watching him with bright, curious eyes. Lucas stopped in his tracks, unsure of how to act. He still wasn't certain how he felt about his new companion. Max was loud and energetic, traits that stood in stark contrast to Lucas's quiet, introspective nature. His mother, Maria, appeared in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She noticed Lucas's hesitation and tried to encourage him. "Good morning, Lucas," she greeted him with a smile. "Max seems really lively today. Why don't you give him some fruit?" Lucas slowly nodded and walked over to the fruit bowl, picking out an apple. He approached the cage cautiously, extending the apple towards Max. The parrot tilted its head, inspecting the fruit before taking a small bite, letting out a sound of approval. Lucas couldn't help but smile, a shy, hesitant smile, but a genuine one. As Lucas watched Max enjoy the apple, something shifted inside him. There was a simplicity in the interaction, a gesture of giving and receiving that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Lucas didn't have many friends at school, and this small exchange with the parrot felt like the beginning of something different, something he didn't fully understand yet. Throughout the day, Lucas found himself more aware of Max's presence. Though he wasn't sure how to fully interact with the parrot, he often caught himself observing the bird with curiosity. Max seemed equally interested in Lucas, frequently letting out soft sounds when the boy walked by, as if trying to establish a connection. That evening, after a long day at school, Lucas felt particularly drained. The isolation he felt among his classmates weighed heavier than usual, and the constant pressure to fit in was becoming overwhelming. When he got home, all he wanted was to retreat into his drawings, the one place where he felt truly free. He locked himself in his room, pulling out his sketchbook. But this time, something was different. His thoughts were scattered, and he couldn't focus on drawing. Every time he tried to create a new image, his mind drifted back to Max. The parrot was there, in his thoughts, a constant and unexpected presence. Suddenly, Lucas heard a familiar sound coming from the hallway. He recognized Max's voice, but there was something strange about it. The parrot was mimicking a sound that Lucas often made when he was alone, a quiet murmur that he unconsciously let slip when lost in thought. It was a low, almost inaudible sound, but it carried all the weight of his unexpressed feelings. Lucas froze. How had Max learned that sound? He had never spoken it aloud. It was always something he kept to himself, a secret that shielded him from the outside world. Yet there was Max, repeating the sound with eerie accuracy. Curious, Lucas left his room and walked into the living room, where Max was watching him intently. "Hi," Lucas murmured almost involuntarily. Max immediately echoed the greeting, mimicking the same soft, hesitant tone. A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. It was as if the parrot was genuinely trying to communicate with him, trying to reach out to something Lucas kept hidden. "Hi," Max said again, this time louder. Lucas stood still, unsure of how to react. Part of him was amazed, while another part felt an unsettling discomfort. He had never imagined that a simple animal could understand, or at least imitate, something so personal. It was as if Max was trying to break through the invisible barrier Lucas had built around himself. Maria, hearing the interaction from the other room, walked into the living room and smiled when she saw Lucas and Max talking. "It seems like you two are starting to understand each other," she said, hoping to ease the tension she sensed in Lucas. Lucas looked at his mother and then back at Max, still speechless. He didn't know what was happening, but something inside him was beginning to stir, as if a door was slowly opening. That night, Lucas went to bed with a restless mind. Max continued to echo his words from the other room, each sound a reminder that Lucas wasn't as alone as he had thought. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt that he was on the brink of something significant, something that could change the way he saw the world and, perhaps, the way the world saw him. In the days that followed, Lucas began to spend more time with Max. The parrot's presence became a comforting constant in his life, a silent companion who was always there, ready to echo his murmurs with perfect mimicry. Slowly, Lucas started to realize that although Max was just a bird, he was capable of understanding and replicating much more than just words. Soon, Lucas's routine included visiting Max as soon as he returned from school. He would sit beside the cage and draw while the parrot watched him intently. Often, Lucas would talk softly to himself while drawing, and Max, with his keen attention, would pick up on every word, every sound. At first, Lucas found it intriguing, but over time, he began to find comfort in Max's active presence. "You like to draw, don't you?" Lucas said one afternoon, more to himself than to the parrot. "Draw," Max repeated, with a curious inflection in his voice. Lucas smiled. The repetition was strange, yet at the same time, it felt like Max was trying to connect with him in a way no one else could. It was a simple exchange, but it held deep meaning for the boy. For the first time, Lucas felt that someone, even if it was just a bird, was truly paying attention to him. Despite this progress at home, life at school remained challenging. Lucas was still the target of jokes and teasing from the other students, who didn't understand his quiet demeanor. He preferred to isolate himself, often hiding at the back of the classroom, sketching in his notebook to escape the reality around him. One particularly difficult afternoon, Lucas became the target of bullying by a group of boys who mocked his quiet, withdrawn nature. They grabbed his sketchbook, tearing out the pages while laughing at his expense. Lucas, too scared to stand up to them, was paralyzed, feeling the familiar sense of helplessness wash over him. He wanted to shout, to say something, but the words were trapped, suffocated by years of fear and insecurity. When he finally managed to escape the situation, Lucas ran home, tears streaming down his face. Upon arriving, he went straight to the living room where Max was waiting for him. The parrot, sensing Lucas's distress, tilted his head to the side, watching him closely. Lucas collapsed onto the sofa, still clutching the torn pieces of his sketchbook. He looked at Max, who seemed to understand that something was wrong. Lucas began to speak, his voice choked with emotion. "They ripped up my drawings." Max echoed a soft sound, as if offering some form of comfort. "Drawings," the parrot repeated, his voice filled with a strange tenderness. Lucas sobbed, overwhelmed by everything that had happened that day. But instead of shutting down completely, he began to talk to Max, even though his words were broken by tears. I don't know why they do that," Lucas said. "I just want to draw, and be left alone." Max continued to watch him silently, but there was something comforting in the way the parrot seemed to pay attention to every word Lucas spoke. "Alone," Max echoed, imitating Lucas. Hearing the word repeated by Max made Lucas pause for a moment. Somehow, hearing that feeling echoed back to him, even in such a simple way, brought a small wave of relief. It was as if Max was acknowledging his pain, validating what he was feeling. In the days that followed, Lucas began to use Max as a way to vent his emotions. He talked to the parrot in ways he had never talked to anyone else. The simple act of expressing his feelings, even through repeated words, helped Lucas manage the whirlwind of emotions he carried inside. One afternoon, as he was sitting and drawing beside Max, Lucas heard the parrot say something unexpected. "Strong, you're strong," Max said, imitating a phrase Lucas often murmured to himself during moments of distress. Lucas stopped drawing, looking at Max with wide eyes. That phrase, spoken by Max, seemed to carry a different meaning. It was as if the parrot was trying to tell Lucas something he needed to hear, something he had never truly believed. Strong, Lucas whispered, almost as if testing the word. Max nodded his head, as if encouraging Lucas to believe it. That small moment marked the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between Lucas and Max. The parrot was not just a pet anymore, he had become a confidant, someone who reflected back to Lucas his deepest words in a way that made him start to believe them. Lucas began to gain confidence, albeit slowly and timidly. He knew school would continue to be difficult, but he felt that with Max by his side, he had an unexpected source of support, a new strength to face the daily challenges. The bond between Lucas and Max continued to grow, bringing a new light into the boy's life. Each day was a small victory, and although the path ahead was still filled with obstacles, Lucas began to believe that, perhaps, he could overcome them all. With Max by his side, he felt that he was no longer alone. As the days went by, the bond between Lucas and Max deepened. The parrot had become more than just a companion. He was now a voice for Lucas, a way for the boy to express what he couldn't put into words. The comfort Lucas found in Max was undeniable, and he began to open up in ways he had never imagined. Lucas, who once avoided verbal interactions, started using Max as a kind of intermediary in social situations. At home, he spent most of his time by the parrot's side, whispering while drawing or doing homework. Lucas's mother, Anna, noticed the change and was happy to see her son more engaged, even if this communication was indirect. One afternoon, as Anna was preparing dinner, she heard Lucas talking to Max in the living room. At first, it seemed like just another one of their usual conversations, but then she heard something that made her pause and listen more closely. "Max, can you ask Mom to make dessert tonight?" Lucas murmured, shyly. The parrot, with his incredible ability to mimic, repeated the phrase toward the kitchen, his curious tone bringing a smile to Anna's face. "Mom, dessert," Max said, almost as if he was asking on Lucas's behalf. Anna laughed, but couldn't help feeling a pang of emotion. It was the first time Lucas had made such a direct request, even if indirectly. She saw in that small interaction a significant milestone, a step forward in their communication. "Of course, Lucas," Anna replied, giving him a loving look. "We can make dessert together later." Lucas glanced at Max, a slight smile on his lips, and whispered a thank you to the parrot. There was something almost magical about the way Max seemed to understand and convey his desires and thoughts, and Lucas began to feel more comfortable using him to express himself. As time went on, Lucas started using Max in more complex situations. When he needed to ask his mother for something or wanted to say something but felt the words wouldn't come out right, he turned to Max. The parrot had become a sort of translator for his emotions, a bridge between Lucas's inner world and the outside world. But not everything was perfect. The relationship between Lucas and Max also brought new challenges. Sometimes, the parrot would repeat phrases that Lucas preferred to keep private, or say something at an inopportune moment, creating awkward situations. One afternoon after school, as Anna was chatting with a friend who had come to visit, Lucas sat on the couch next to Max. He began to murmur to the parrot, talking about how hard his day had been. He spoke of the cruel comments from his classmates and how sad he felt for not being able to stand up for himself. "They said I'm weird," Lucas whispered to Max, feeling the weight of the day in his words. To his surprise and horror, Max repeated the phrase out loud, not just to Lucas but to everyone in the room. "Weird," Max said, clearly and without hesitation. Anna's friend looked at Lucas with a surprised expression, and Lucas felt his face burn with embarrassment. He hadn't wanted anyone to know how he felt about himself, especially not his mother, in such a direct way. Anna, sensing her son's discomfort, quickly changed the subject, trying to ease the tension. But Lucas was devastated. He felt as if Max had betrayed his trust, revealing his most private thoughts without his permission. Lucas remained silent for the rest of the visit, and as soon as his mother's friend left, he ran to his room, slamming the door shut. Max tried to follow him, but Lucas was too hurt to let him in. "Why did you say that?" Lucas whispered to the parrot, still feeling the shame and embarrassment weighing on him. Max, not fully understanding the situation, tilted his head and made a comforting sound, as if he was trying to apologize. But for Lucas, the damage was done. For the first time since Max had arrived, Lucas felt betrayed by his feathered friend. In the days that followed, Lucas distanced himself from Max. He stopped talking to the parrot as he used to, remaining silent and avoiding using the bird as his voice. Anna noticed the change and tried to talk to her son, but Lucas was closed off, unwilling to discuss what had happened. "Lucas, I know you're upset with Max," Anna said one night as she helped him get ready for bed. But he was just trying to repeat what he heard. "He didn't mean to hurt you." Lucas nodded, but the pain still ran deep. He knew Max hadn't intended to hurt him, but the words the parrot had repeated had made him feel exposed and vulnerable. As Lucas lay down, he looked at Max, who was perched silently, watching him. Lucas sighed, feeling the weight of the decision to trust the parrot again. "Sorry, Max," Lucas murmured before closing his eyes. "I just need some time." And with that, Lucas fell asleep, leaving behind the turmoil of the day, but with a heart torn between hurt and understanding. The days passed, and the distance between Lucas and Max remained. Although they still saw each other every day, Lucas avoided the conversations that had once felt so natural between them. He continued to care for Max, but the communication that had bonded them had been broken. Lucas was deeply hurt, and the fear of being exposed again made him retreat even further into himself. At school, things hadn't improved either. Lucas was still the target of cruel comments and mean jokes. The incident with Max, which once seemed like a small blip in his life, now felt like it had shattered the fragile confidence he had started to build. The days dragged on, and Lucas felt increasingly isolated. Then came the announcement of a school event. The school was organizing a talent show where every student was expected to showcase a skill or personal interest. For many, the opportunity was exciting, but for Lucas, the idea of performing in front of his classmates was terrifying. He knew he didn't have the social skills to speak in public, and the fear of being ridiculed was overwhelming. When Lucas's mother, Anna, heard about the event, she tried to encourage him to participate. "Lucas, why don't you draw something for the presentation?" Anna suggested with a hopeful smile. "Your drawings are amazing, and it would be a great way to show everyone your talent." Lucas shook his head, refusing immediately. The very thought of presenting in front of everyone made him want to disappear. He didn't want to be the center of attention again, especially after everything that had happened with Max. Seeing the fear in her son's eyes, Anna decided not to push him but remained hopeful that he might change his mind. She knew Lucas had a lot to offer and hoped he would find a way to overcome his fears. However, Lucas remained determined to avoid the event. On the day of the talent show, he arrived at school feeling a crushing weight on his shoulders. His classmates were excited, practicing their lines and tuning their instruments, but Lucas was silent and withdrawn, hoping the day would pass without incident. But fate had other plans. During the talent show, when it was another student's turn to perform, the teacher suddenly called out to Lucas. "Lucas, you brought your parrot today, didn't you?" the teacher asked, smiling encouragingly. "How about showing the class what he can do?" Lucas froze. He hadn't planned on participating, and he certainly didn't want to put Max in a situation where he might repeat something inappropriate. But before he could refuse, the teacher was already bringing Max to the front of the room, while the students whispered and giggled. Lucas's heart pounded wildly. He looked at Max, who was perched calmly, seemingly uninterested. Lucas knew he had no control over what Max might say, and the fear that something embarrassing might be revealed sent him into a panic. "Come on, Lucas, show us what Max can do," the teacher insisted, unaware of Lucas's anguish. Feeling trapped, Lucas slowly approached Max. He didn't want to do this, but he knew he had no other choice. With a dry throat and trembling hands, he began to speak to Max, hoping the parrot wouldn't say anything that would get him into trouble. "Hi, Max," Lucas murmured, his voice weak. Max, with his characteristic precision, repeated the greeting. "Hi, Max," the parrot said in an animated tone. The students laughed, and for a moment, Lucas felt a brief sense of relief. Maybe, if he could control the situation, everything would turn out fine. But then, the inevitable happened. "They said I'm weird," Max repeated loudly and clearly. The laughter in the room stopped instantly, replaced by an awkward silence. Lucas stood paralyzed, feeling his face flush. Max's words had exposed his biggest fear, his deepest secret. He knew his classmates thought he was weird, but hearing it repeated so publicly made him feel small and vulnerable. The students started whispering, and some even laughed quietly, but the damage was done. Lucas felt the tears welling up in his eyes, but he refused to cry there, in front of everyone. "Thank you, Lucas, that was great," the teacher said quickly, trying to smooth over the situation. "Everyone can sit down now." Lucas returned to his seat, but he could barely focus. All he wanted was to disappear, to leave that place where he felt so exposed and humiliated. He knew that from that moment on, things at school would only get worse. When the talent show finally ended, Lucas ran out of the room, ignoring the looks and whispers of his classmates. He wanted to go home, far away from it all, but he knew he still had to wait until the end of the school day. That day, when Lucas returned home, he was a wreck. Max, sensing the boy's sadness, tried to comfort him by repeating the kind words he had learned over time. "You're strong, strong," Max said, trying to reassure Lucas. But the words that once brought comfort now felt empty to Lucas. He looked at Max with pain in his eyes, feeling betrayed once again, even though he knew the parrot wasn't to blame. "Why did you do that?" Lucas whispered, his voice choked with tears. "I trusted you." Max, not fully understanding, tilted his head and made a soft sound, as if he was trying to apologize. That night, Lucas refused to eat dinner. He locked himself in his room, drawing frantically in his notebook, trying to escape the thoughts that tormented him. But no matter how hard he tried, the memory of that day's humiliation haunted him, and he felt that he had lost the one thing that had kept him sane, his connection with Max. Lucas didn't know what to do. He felt lost, unsure of how to move forward. The world, which had always been difficult for him, now seemed even more cruel and unforgiving. The days following the school event were some of the loneliest Lucas had ever faced. He distanced himself from everything and everyone, including Pepe. The special bond he had formed with the parrot, which once made him feel understood and less alone, now seemed to be a source of pain. Lucas couldn't overcome the embarrassment and sense of betrayal, even though he knew Pepe was only repeating what he had heard. At school, things only got worse. The phrase Pepe had repeated became a joke among his classmates, who used it to taunt Lucas at every opportunity. The words weird and strong were thrown at him like weapons, wounding him with each repetition. Lucas, who was already withdrawn, retreated even further. He avoided any interaction and spent his breaks hiding in a corner of the school, either drawing in his notebook or simply staring into space. At home, Anna grew increasingly worried about her son. She noticed the weight Lucas was carrying and the effort he made to avoid Pepe. The parrot, once a constant presence by Lucas's side, now seemed lonely in his cage, calling out for the boy in vain. "Lucas, do you want to talk about what happened?" Anna asked one evening, as she helped him pack his school bag for the next day. Lucas shook his head, not saying a word. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to relive the embarrassment he felt. Anna sighed, feeling her son's pain and wishing she could help him somehow. "You know, Lucas, sometimes things happen in ways we don't expect, and we end up getting hurt," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we should push away those we love. Pepe didn't want to hurt you. He was just repeating what he heard." Lucas remained silent, processing his mother's words. He knew she was right, but the fear of being exposed again kept him from opening up. Even so, a small part of Lucas missed the comforting presence of Pepe, the conversations they had, and the silent support the parrot offered. That night, Lucas went to bed with a heavy heart. His room, once a safe refuge, now felt claustrophobic. He looked over at Pepe, who was perched and asleep. The parrot seemed peaceful, but Lucas knew something was missing. The connection that had united them was lost. Days passed, and Lucas continued to keep his distance from Pepe. He spent hours in his room, drawing in his notebook, trying to find some peace in the lines and shapes. But no matter how hard he tried, the emptiness inside him continued to grow. What once brought him comfort now felt insufficient. One afternoon, after another difficult day at school, Lucas sat on his bed and looked at his sketchbook. He flipped through the pages, passing by drawings he had made before the school event. Pepe's images were everywhere, representing moments of happiness and understanding. Each drawing was a reminder of a time when Lucas felt less alone, when he believed he had found someone who understood him, even if that someone was a bird. Lucas closed the notebook with a sigh, feeling tears start to form. He was tired of feeling this way, tired of carrying that hurt. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't ignore the sense of loss that had been building up inside him. Maybe, Lucas thought, it was time to stop running from his feelings. He got up from his bed and went to the living room, where Pepe was still perched. The parrot watched him approach, tilting his head as if waiting for something. "Hi, Pepe," Lucas said, his voice low and trembling. Pepe responded with a soft sound, but didn't repeat Lucas's words. The boy felt a pang in his heart as he realized that the parrot was just as hurt as he was. Lucas knew he needed to do something to make things right, but he still didn't know how. That night, as he lay in bed, Lucas thought long and hard about everything that had happened. He knew he was pushing Pepe away out of fear, but he also knew that the parrot wasn't the true cause of his pain. Pepe was just trying to connect with him in the only way he knew how. Lucas realized that if he continued to isolate himself, he would never overcome what had happened. He needed to face his fears, and more importantly, he needed to make amends with Pepe. The parrot was more than just a pet. He was a friend who had given Lucas the courage to express himself when no one else understood. The next morning, Lucas woke up determined to make peace with Pepe. He went downstairs and walked over to the cage, where Pepe was perched, watching him intently. "I'm sorry, Pepe," Lucas said, feeling a lump in his throat. "I shouldn't have blamed you. You were just trying to help me." Pepe tilted his head, letting out a soft sound that Lucas took as an acceptance. Lucas reached out and, with a hesitant gesture, opened the cage. Pepe flew to Lucas's shoulder, and the boy felt a comforting warmth as the parrot's feathers brushed against his face. "I want to try again," Lucas murmured. "I want to be your friend again." Pepe responded with a light whistle, and Lucas knew that, somehow, the parrot understood him. The connection they had wasn't completely lost, and Lucas felt that together, they could start to rebuild what had been broken. The first step toward reconciliation had been taken, but Lucas knew there was still a long road ahead. He needed to learn to trust again, both in Pepe and in himself. And with the parrot by his side, Lucas felt that maybe, just maybe, he had the strength to face the challenges that still lay ahead. With the reconciliation between Lucas and Pepe, a new chapter began to unfold in the boy's life. Although he still carried the weight of painful memories, Lucas felt stronger, more capable of facing the challenges ahead. Pepe's presence, now restored to his life, brought back the comfort and confidence he had lost. At school, things didn't change overnight. The hurtful comments still occasionally surfaced, but Lucas began to realize that he had a choice. He could either let the words affect him or face them with the resilience he was rediscovering. He decided that he would no longer allow fear to dictate his actions. A few days after the reconciliation, Lucas's mother, Anna, received an invitation to a family gathering that was to take place soon. It would be an important occasion, where relatives Lucas hadn't seen in a long time would be present. Upon hearing about the gathering, Lucas felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew this would be an opportunity to prove himself, to show everyone that he was overcoming his difficulties. But above all, he wanted to show himself that he was capable of expressing himself without hiding behind Pepe. "Lucas, I know it might be a bit scary, but I think you should take this gathering as an opportunity to talk about how you feel," Anna suggested one evening while they were having dinner. Lucas looked at his mother, feeling the nervousness churn in his stomach. The idea of speaking in front of so many relatives, many of whom he barely knew, seemed overwhelming. But at the same time, he knew that this was a chance to face his fears once and for all. "Maybe," he said hesitantly. "I just don't know what to say." Anna smiled, understanding her son's internal struggle. "It doesn't have to be something big, Lucas. Just be yourself. Say what you feel. We all want to hear your voice." Lucas nodded, but the nervousness didn't leave him. That night, after going to bed, he began to think about everything he wanted to say. He knew he needed to find the right words, words that reflected his feelings, his journey, and the importance of Pepe in his life. In the days leading up to the gathering, Lucas spent hours in his room, drafting what he wanted to say. He knew Pepe would be by his side, but he also wanted the words to come from himself, without depending on the parrot. He wanted his family to see who he truly was, beyond the silence and the barriers he had built over the years. During one of these nights, as he was writing in his notebook, Lucas felt the comforting presence of Pepe by his side. The parrot was quiet, as if he knew that Lucas needed space to organize his thoughts. "What do you think, Pepe?" Lucas asked, looking up from his notebook. Pepe tilted his head, observing the scribbles on the paper. Although he couldn't respond with his own words, Lucas felt that the parrot was there to support him, offering the confidence he so desperately needed. On the morning of the gathering, Lucas woke up with a mixed feeling of nervousness and excitement. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say countless times, but he knew that practice didn't completely eliminate the fear. Still, he was determined to try. Anna noticed her son's anxiety and tried to reassure him. "Everything will be fine, Lucas. Just remember that we're all here to support you." Lucas nodded, trying to smile, but the weight of expectation still lingered. However, he knew that this was a battle he needed to fight for himself. When they arrived at the gathering, the family house was full of relatives, all chatting animatedly. Lucas felt a bit overwhelmed by the noisy environment, but he kept Pepe close, feeling the familiar sense of comfort the parrot provided. During lunch, while everyone was gathered around the table, Anna signaled to Lucas, encouraging him to stand up and speak. Lucas felt his stomach churn, but he took a deep breath, determined to move forward. He stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone on him. The room fell silent immediately, and Lucas could hear his own heart beating in his chest. I wanted to say a few things," Lucas began, his voice hesitant. The relatives watched him attentively, without interrupting. Lucas glanced at Pepe, who was perched near him, as if giving him strength. I know I don't talk much, and that, sometimes, it's hard for me to express myself. But I want you all to know that I'm trying. I've been doing this with the help of Pepe, who's been my friend when I feel alone. Lucas paused, feeling the tension in the room. He knew this was the most important moment, the moment when he needed to fully open up. I also wanted to say that, for a long time, I was afraid to speak, afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But now, I'm trying to overcome that. I know I'll still have difficult moments, but I'm learning to be strong. And I know that with all of your help, and with Pepe by my side, I can keep trying. Lucas finished, feeling a wave of relief as he concluded his words. For a moment, the silence in the room was heavy, but it soon turned into applause and words of encouragement. Anna smiled at her son, tears in her eyes, and was the first to hug him. I'm so proud of you, Lucas, she whispered. You were amazing. Lucas, still a bit stunned, looked at Pepe, who tilted his head and let out a soft sound, as if congratulating the boy for his bravery. For the first time, Lucas felt that he had done something important, something that brought him closer to his family and to himself. He knew there was still a long way to go, but that moment marked the beginning of a new phase in his life, a phase where he would no longer need to hide. And with Pepe by his side, Lucas knew he could face any challenge that came next. Lucas felt like a new person after his speech at the family gathering. The sense of relief and accomplishment that enveloped him after expressing himself in front of everyone was powerful. He had faced his fear, and although he still felt nervous, he realized that he could be heard, that he had a voice that mattered. The gathering continued in a light and festive atmosphere. Lucas, who would normally withdraw and remain silent, was approached by several relatives who congratulated him on his courage. They spoke about how impressed they were with his speech, and many commented on how much he had grown recently. For perhaps the first time, Lucas felt seen and respected for who he truly was, not just as the quiet boy everyone found difficult to understand. Pepe, always by Lucas's side, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. He responded to the relatives' greetings with cheerful sounds and occasionally repeated encouraging words he had heard during the event. Lucas found himself smiling more, feeling an even stronger bond with the parrot who, in so many ways, had helped him reach this point. As the gathering ended and everyone began to say their goodbyes, Lucas felt tired but satisfied. The walk home was peaceful, and he held his mother's hand, feeling the warmth and support that had always been there but now felt more tangible. You were very brave today, Lucas, Anna said, breaking the silence as they walked. I always knew you had it in you. Lucas smiled at his mother, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift. Thank you, Mom. And thank you for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, Lucas replied, his voice still a bit hesitant but filled with sincerity. When they arrived home, Lucas felt exhausted but also excited. He knew that day had been a big step, but he also knew the journey was far from over. The world still seemed like a big place full of challenges, but he was more prepared to face them, with Pepe by his side. That night, Lucas decided to do something he had never done before. He picked up his sketchbook, and instead of drawing, he began to write. It wasn't a speech or anything planned, but words that flowed from his mind and heart. He wrote about his feelings, his insecurities, and his hopes. He wrote about Pepe and how the parrot had changed his life, how Pepe had given him the courage to express himself and face his fears. Lucas knew these words were important, even if they were never read by anyone else but him. It was the first time he had truly put his feelings into words, and it made him feel stronger. When he finished writing, Lucas felt an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He knew there would still be tough days ahead, but he also knew he now had the tools to face them. Pepe, perched by his side, seemed to share this peace, letting out a soft whistle before falling asleep. The next morning, school seemed less intimidating. Lucas still faced the curious looks of his classmates, but now he felt he could handle it. During recess, he approached a group of boys who were playing ball. They stopped playing when they saw him approach, clearly surprised by Lucas's initiative. "Can I play with you?" Lucas asked, his voice firm but friendly. The boys looked at each other for a moment before one of them, who usually led the group, shrugged and passed the ball to Lucas. "Sure, why not?" he replied, trying to sound indifferent but unable to hide his surprise. Lucas caught the ball and, for the first time in a long time, felt like part of the group. It wasn't a grand gesture, but for Lucas, it meant the world. He knew this was just a small victory, but it was an important one. As the day went on, Lucas felt increasingly secure. The whispers and glances that used to bother him didn't affect him as much because he knew that, deep down, others' opinions wouldn't define who he was. He was building his own identity, and Pepe was by his side, as a friend and confidant. At the end of the day, when Lucas returned home, he was greeted by Pepe's usual cheerful sounds. But this time, Lucas didn't see the parrot as just a companion. He saw Pepe as the symbol of everything he had overcome and everything he could still achieve. That night, Lucas and Anna talked more openly than ever before. They spoke about the future, about the challenges they would still face, but also about the hopes and dreams that now seemed more attainable. Lucas knew that the road ahead still had obstacles, but with Pepe and his mother by his side, he felt he could face anything. As he went to bed, Lucas closed his eyes, feeling a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. He knew that, no matter what the future held, he was ready. He had found his voice, and with it, the courage to be who he truly was. The days following the family gathering marked a definitive change in Lucas's life. He still faced the daily challenges of being an autistic boy in a world that often didn't understand his way of being, but the difference now was that Lucas was no longer alone in his struggle. He had found his voice, and with it, an inner strength he hadn't known he possessed. At school, Lucas continued to participate more actively, gradually approaching his classmates and earning their respect through his actions rather than just words. He realized that by demonstrating confidence and authenticity, the barriers that once seemed insurmountable began to dissolve. Although challenges remained, Lucas faced each one with a new perspective, understanding that every small step was a victory in his personal journey. Pepe, as always, was by Lucas's side, watching with bright eyes as the boy grew. The parrot seemed more joyful than ever, making his characteristic sounds and imitating the encouraging phrases he heard daily. Lucas and Pepe had rediscovered their connection, now stronger and more meaningful than before. At home, the relationship between Lucas and his mother, Anna, also deepened. They talked more, sharing thoughts and feelings more openly. Anna didn't hide the pride she felt for her son and the way he was handling his challenges. For Lucas, this new phase in his life brought not only a sense of accomplishment but also a deeper understanding of the love and support that had always been there, even in the moments when he couldn't perceive them. One quiet afternoon, while Lucas was in his room drawing, Anna entered with a smile on her face. "Lucas, I was thinking, how would you feel about entering a drawing contest that's happening in the city?" she suggested, with an encouraging look. Lucas paused for a moment, considering the idea. He had always enjoyed drawing, but he had never thought about showing his work publicly. However, after everything he had been through, the idea of sharing his drawings with others seemed less intimidating. It was a new opportunity to express himself, this time through his art. "I think it would be cool," Lucas responded, a bit hesitant but also with a curious spark in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that," Anna said, giving him a loving hug. I'm sure your drawings will impress a lot of people." In the days that followed, Lucas dedicated himself to preparing his best pieces for the contest. He carefully chose the drawings that meant the most to him, including some that represented his personal journey alongside Pepe. Every line on the paper reflected a part of his story, and by the end of the process, Lucas felt ready to share a part of himself with the world. The day of the contest arrived, and Lucas was accompanied by Anna and Pepe, who stayed in a quiet corner of the gallery where the event was being held. Although nervous, Lucas felt excited to see so many people admiring the artwork on display. He realized that art had the power to communicate something profound, something that went beyond words and reached people's hearts. When the judges arrived at his section, Lucas remained calm, remembering everything he had overcome to get there. He knew that, regardless of the outcome, he was already a winner for having the courage to participate. At the end of the event, Lucas received an honorable mention for his expressiveness and sensitivity, a recognition that brought tears of joy to Anna's eyes. Back home, Lucas felt more complete than ever. He had found new ways to express himself, ways that allowed him to show the world who he really was. Pepe, always by his side, continued to be a source of comfort and inspiration, a faithful friend who had been there during the tough times and now shared in his joy. One evening, as Lucas prepared for bed, he had a final conversation with Anna before turning off the lights. "Mom," Lucas began softly, "I just wanted to thank you for always being by my side. I know it wasn't easy, but you never gave up on me." Anna approached and gently stroked Lucas's hair, her eyes shining with pride and love. "Lucas, you are one of the greatest joys of my life. Seeing you grow, overcome your fears, and find your voice, it means everything to me. I will always be here, supporting you in everything you do." Lucas smiled, feeling a deep peace. He knew there was still much to learn, many challenges to face, but now he was more confident than ever that he could face them. He had discovered the strength of his own voice, the power of his art, and, above all, the value of the connections that helped him move forward. That night, as he closed his eyes, Lucas heard the gentle sound of Pepe on his perch. It was a familiar sound, a sound that always calmed him. And with that, Lucas fell asleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but that he was ready to face them, with Pepe, his mother, and his inner strength by his side.